She waited until the waiter had cleared our plates before she slid the envelope across the table. I remember staring at it for a moment. The restaurant was one of those mid-range places in Mississauga that tries too hard. Cloth napkins, candles in glass jars, the kind of place my mother picked when she wanted to feel like she was doing something generous without actually spending much. She had ordered the salmon. She always ordered the salmon. "Open it," she said. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a property transfer document. At the top, an address I didn't recognize, somewhere in Simcoe County, north of Barrie, and at the bottom, already signed, her name in blue ink. "It's yours," she said, folding her hands on the table like she was presenting me with a gift she expected me to be grateful for. The old flower shop, the building, the land, everything. I looked up. "The one Grandma left you?" "It's been sitting empty for 11 years. No one wants it. The roof leaks, the electrical hasn't been touched since the 90s, and the municipality sent a notice last spring about bylaw violations." She smiled at me over the rim of her water glass. "Congratulations." I didn't say anything. I was trying to understand what was happening. "Your brother got the house in Oakville," she continued. "That was his inheritance. This is yours." My brother, 38 years old, never paid rent a day in his life. My mother had been setting aside that Oakville house, a detached 4-bedroom she'd bought in 2009 for $310,000, now worth well over $1.5 million. Since he was in his 20s, she'd told me once that she was going to split things evenly when the time came. That was 4 years ago. This was the split. I drove back to my apartment in Hamilton that night, with the envelope on the passenger seat. I didn't open it again. I already knew what it said. The building was in Thornbury, a small town on Georgian Bay that had spent the last decade turning itself into something of a weekend destination. Skiing in the winter, cycling trails in the summer, that kind of thing. The property was on a side street 2 blocks from the main strip. It had been a florist when my grandmother ran it, then it sat vacant after she moved into assisted living and eventually passed away. My mother had kept the property taxes paid, barely, but done nothing else with it. When I drove up to see it for the first time, I sat in the car for a long time. One of the front windows had been boarded up with plywood. The sign was still there, faded pink letters spelling out the name of a business that had closed before I finished high school. There was a crack running along the exterior brickwork, from the foundation to the roofline, that I was pretty sure wasn't structural but wasn't confident enough to dismiss. I could hear my mother's voice in my head. "It's been sitting there doing nothing. Might as well be yours." What she meant was, it was worthless. What she meant was, your brother's inheritance is real, and this is what we're giving you to make it look fair. I sat in that car for 40 minutes. Then I got out, walked around the building twice, looked at the crack in the brick, looked at the boarded window, looked at the overgrown lot beside it, and pulled out my phone to call a contractor I knew from a project I'd managed at work. "I need an honest assessment," I told him. "Not what I want to hear." He drove up the following Saturday. He walked through every room with a flashlight. He checked the roof from the outside, tested the floors, looked at the electrical panel, and stood in the main room for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "The bones are good. The location is actually decent. This is fixable." He gave me a quote. It was significant. It was also not impossible. I want to be clear about something, because I know what people think when they hear a story like this. They think, why didn't you just sell it, take whatever you could get and walk away? And the honest answer is that I thought about it. For about 3 weeks, I thought about almost nothing else. I ran the numbers. I looked at comparable properties in the area. I called a real estate agent who told me I could probably move it as for somewhere between $200,000 and $220,000, assuming the right buyer. $200,000. Split unevenly by my mother into $1.5 million for my brother and $200,000 for me. That was when something shifted. I didn't make any announcements. I didn't call my mother and tell her what I was planning. I went to the bank, I refinanced my car, I withdrew every dollar of the TFSA I'd been building since my first real job, and I hired the contractor. I took on every overtime shift available at work for the next 4 months. I drove up to Thornbury on weekends and painted walls myself and cleaned out decades of debris and made decisions about flooring and lighting and plumbing fixtures at 10 o'clock at night with a coffee going cold beside me. My mother called occasionally. How was I doing? Fine. How was the property? Fine. Was I thinking of selling it? I haven't decided yet. She told my brother I was probably going to sell it for whatever I could get. He apparently found this funny. 14 months after I signed that transfer document, I opened a small café and retail shop in that building. Local sourced goods on the shelves, preserves, candles, honey from a producer I'd met at a farmer's market in Collingwood, handmade ceramics from a woman in Meaford, 6 tables, good espresso. A short seasonal menu. I'd done enough research to know what tourists wanted when they came through that part of Georgian Bay on a long weekend, and I'd built something that delivered exactly that. The first summer, I broke even. The second summer, I cleared enough to pay off the contractor and make my first real repayment on the renovation debt. The third year, I had a wait list for the small retail space I'd started subletting to local makers on a rotating basis, and I was being mentioned in weekend travel pieces in Toronto publications. I hadn't told my family any of this. I blocked my brother's number 2 years earlier, after a conversation that I won't describe in detail, except to say that he told me, in very plain language, that my mother had always known I was the one who wouldn't amount to much, and that the Thornbury property was her way of being honest about that without having to say it directly. My mother, when I told her what he said, told me I was being sensitive, so I didn't tell them. I kept my social media private. I told the people in my life who needed to know, and I asked them not to share anything publicly. My contractor, who had become something of a friend by then, said he admired my restraint. I told him it wasn't restraint, it was just patience. My mother found out through my cousin. My cousin had driven through Thornbury on a long weekend with her husband and their 2 kids and stopped for coffee, not knowing it was mine, because the name I'd given the business was not my name and not anything connected to my family. She recognized me behind the counter. She sent a photo to my mother that afternoon with a message that I later found out said simply, "Did you know about this?" My mother called within the hour. I was closing up for the day when my phone rang, and I looked at the screen and stood there for a moment before I answered. She didn't say hello. She said, "I heard you have a shop up there." "I do," I said. Silence. Then, "Why didn't you tell me?" I locked the front door and walked to the back room and sat down on a stool. "I don't know," I said. "I suppose I wanted to see if I could do it first. Your brother would like to see it." That sentence landed exactly the way I think she intended it to. Not "I'd like to see it," not "I'm proud of you." Your brother would like to see it. "Sure," I said. "Anytime." She called me 3 days later and told me they would be driving up that Friday, my brother, his girlfriend, and my mother. They would arrive around noon, and they planned to stay through the weekend. Did I have space for them to stay? I did not have space for them to stay. I was renting a small apartment above the shop, and it fit exactly one person, which was me. I told her this. She suggested the 3 of them could stay at my place while I made other arrangements. I said I'd see what I could do. I booked myself into a bed and breakfast 2 streets over for the weekend, paid for it out of the business account, and wrote it off. They arrived on Friday at 12:30. I was behind the counter when they came through the door, and I watched my brother look around the room. The exposed brick I'd had repointed, the original wood floors I'd refinished, the shelves I'd built with my own hands, and I saw something move across his face that he tried to cover quickly with a smile. "This is nice," he said. My mother sat at one of the tables near the window. She was very quiet. She ordered a latte. She looked at everything. She didn't say much. His girlfriend was kind. She bought 2 jars of the local honey and a candle and asked me questions about the ceramic mugs and genuinely seemed interested in the answers. I liked her. I had nothing against her. That evening, my brother came back alone. It was 40 minutes before closing and the last customers had left. He leaned against the counter and said, "You've built something real here." "Thank you," I said. "What's it worth if you sold the whole thing?" I kept wiping down the counter. "I'm not planning to sell, just curious." He paused. "You know, Mom always said you had a good head for this kind of thing. Running something. She just didn't think you'd ever actually do it." I looked up. "She said that? She thought the property would motivate you." He said it like it was obvious, like it was a compliment, give you something to work with. She was right. I finished wiping down the counter. She gave it to me because she thought it was worthless. He tilted his head slightly. "Maybe, but you made it work anyway." I thought about all the weekends, all the overtime, all the times I'd sat in an empty room that smelled like mildew and paint thinner and made myself believe it was going to become something. I thought about the conversation where he'd told me my mother had always known I was the one who wouldn't amount to much. "Good night," I said. "I'll see you tomorrow." They left on Sunday afternoon. My brother hugged me, which surprised me. My mother stood by the car for a moment before she got in, and I thought she might say something, but she just nodded and looked at the building one more time and got in the car. A week after they left, I got a call from my mother. She had been talking to my brother, she said. She had been thinking, The property had been in the family for a long time. My grandmother had started the business there. It meant something to all of them. I waited. She said she thought perhaps the right thing, the family thing, would be for my brother to be involved. He had good business instincts, she said. He could help. He could be a partner. I said, what kind of partner? She said they had talked about it and they thought something like 50% would be appropriate, given the family history of the property. I held the phone very still. He would bring energy, she said. Connections. He knows people in Toronto who could help with promotion. My brother knew people in Toronto the way everyone knows people in Toronto. He had never run a business. He had never paid for anything with money he had earned from consistent work. He had a way of appearing capable that I had spent my whole life watching my mother mistake for actual capability. I'll think about it, I said. I did not tell her that 2 weeks earlier I had completed a second transaction. The business, the café, the retail operation, the subleasing model, the brand, had been formally structured as a corporation a year after I opened. That corporation was the entity that held the operating lease and all the business assets. The building itself, the physical property, still sat in my name as an individual. What I had done 2 weeks earlier was transfer the building into a new holding company, a numbered corporation in Ontario that was owned entirely by me. The transfer was legal, documented, properly structured with the help of the commercial real estate lawyer I'd hired the previous year. The building's assessed value was recorded accurately. There were no irregularities. There was simply nothing left to partner into. The operating business was a corporation. My brother could not buy his way into a corporation he had no shares in. The building was in a holding company. There was no handshake deal to be done, no informal arrangement to be negotiated. If my family wanted any part of what I had built, they would need to make me an offer on the shares of a corporation at fair market value, which by that point was valued by my accountant at considerably more than the original property transfer had implied. I called my mother back 4 days later. I told her I had spoken to my lawyer. She said, "Good. What does she say?" I said, "She says the business is structured in a way that makes a 50% partnership without capital investment essentially impossible to execute. If my brother would like to invest, we can talk about what that would look like at current valuation." Long silence. "He doesn't have that kind of money," she said. "I know," I said. "You planned this." Her voice had gone flat. "You built all of this on purpose." "You didn't tell us on purpose." I thought about how to answer that honestly. "I built it because I needed to," I said. "I didn't tell you because I'd learned by then what sharing things with this family cost me." She hung up. My brother called an hour later. He was not quiet about his feelings. He used words I won't repeat. He said I had been manipulative. He said I had made a fool of the family. He said that what I had done with his mother's property, he called it that, his mother's property, not my grandmother's, not mine, his mother's, was a betrayal. I let him finish. Then I said, "The building was transferred to me legally. I renovated it with my own money. I built the business with my own labor. I structured it legally to protect what I'd created. That's not manipulation. That's how business works." He hung up. My mother didn't call for 6 weeks. When she finally did, her voice was different, quieter. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking. She said she could see that she hadn't been fair when she divided things, and she wanted me to know that. She stopped short of an actual apology, but I've learned not to hold my breath for those. I said thank you. She asked if there was any possibility of revisiting the partnership conversation. I said the structure of the business hadn't changed and wouldn't change, but I was open to talking about ways the family could be involved that didn't require ownership. She asked what that meant. I said my brother was welcome to apply for a position. I had recently posted for a part-time retail associate. There was a very long pause. "I'll let him know," she said, and then the line was quiet again. He didn't apply. I didn't expect him to. The following spring, a woman from a regional food and travel magazine drove up from Toronto and spent a day at the shop for a feature they were running on small businesses in the Georgian Bay corridor. The piece ran online first, then in print. The photo they used was of the front window, the one that had been boarded up with plywood when I first saw the building. In the photo, it was full of morning light. My cousin sent the article to my mother. My mother forwarded it to me without a message. I read it at the counter before we opened. The writer had asked me, at the end of our conversation, what I would say to someone who inherited something that seemed like nothing. I'd thought about it for a moment. Then I said, "Look at it longer than you think you need to. What looks like nothing is sometimes just something that hasn't been worked yet." I still believe that. I believe it in the particular way that you believe things you had to find out for yourself, without anyone telling you it would be okay, in a building that smelled like mildew, at 10 o'clock at night, with a coffee going cold beside you.